Hello there and welcome. In the previous episode, we started converting our inventory into a stackable one, meaning having the option to store more items of the same kind in the same slot. And this is something you can find in many games, but we didn't have this option, so now we're working on adding this option. For now, if we run the game, so if we pick up a stone, then it will be added into the inventory as usual. We can also see the amount of stones. But if we pick up another stone, it will be added into the same stack instead of being added into the next slot. We can keep doing this, and when we reach the stack limit, which is about 3 in our case, then it will be added into another stack. Of course, we can control the amount of items per stack. And it will continue on. So now we can move them around, but we still cannot merge them together. So this is what we're going to work on in this episode. Inside our item slot script, at the bottom we have this entire else statement that we added in the previous episode. So this checks if the slot is not empty, and then we check if the two items are actually the same. And if they are the same, then we're going to merge them together. But if they're not the same, we simply want to prevent them from disappearing or getting destroyed. So we want to just cancel this operation and we want the item to go back to its place. So over here, we're first going to add another else, and this will be an else to this if. And then we're going to take the drag drop, item being drag, transform, set parent, and we're going to make it a child of this transform. But this is just something temporary we have to do in order to actually remove it and move it back into its slot. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So this is something we have to do. And now inside our drag and drop script, so we can control click on this, we have this on and drag, and this is basically what happens when we drag our item and we drop it somewhere that is not another valid slot. For example, we drop it into the world, or we drop it on some kind of UI that is not the inventory. So in this case, it will simply check if it's not the same start parent, and if the parent is the root, then it's going to ask it if we want to drop it into the world. Now, because we changed the way things work, we need to change this code a bit. So for now, we're just going to take this entire part and move it over here, okay? And then we're going to add some new code. So over here, we simply create a few different if statements, and this will be easier for us to determine different situations. So what happens if we drop the item on an empty slot? What happens if we drop the item outside of the inventory? Instead of just having one statement that will have nested if statements. So over here, we want to add this entire code. So everything we had before, we're going to simply drag all of this. We're going to copy it, cut it, and paste it over here inside this one, the first one. If the new parent is the same as the root. So it means that we probably dropped it outside of any slot. So we want to ask if we want to destroy the item. And of course, we also need this thing over here. Next, we want to add some code into the second if statement. Over here, we're simply going to basically cancel our operation and move the item back into its original slot. And this is what we do over here as well. So if we want to drop it into the world, we're going to do it, but if the player clicks on cancel, it will simply cancel the operation. So if we drag it and basically drop it into the same parent, it means that it's the same slot and we should just cancel the operation and do nothing new. Then over here, We're going to add another if statement inside. And that's just because there can be many different possibilities, different scenarios. We're going to check temp item reference. So over here, we simply check if the parent is not the root, so it means we did not drop it somewhere outside of the inventory system, and the parent is not the start parent. So it means that what if we drop the item on another item, okay? So this brings us to this part over here. And then it checks if we can merge it. So if we cannot merge it, it will simply set it to be the parent of this transform without merging it. And then this part will run. It will simply check if there are more than 2 items. And if there are more than 2 items, it means that there is something inside of this slot, but we also know that the items were not merged. And then it will simply cancel the operation. And that's just the way it works, because this drag and drop script and this item slot script, they work together. Both of them are working at the same time, so the drag and drop sits on the actual item that we drag, but the item slot sits on the slot that we're dragging into or from. So when we drag and drop something, it will check both of these codes to see what is going on and what to do with this item. And over here, it will simply say something, and later we're going to add some code into it. So we can say was not accepted into this slot, and this will say should be moved to another slot. Now we are going to cut this, and we're going to delete this old code that we had, and we're going to leave this. So let's just make things a bit cleaner. Right, so this is what we have inside this on and drag. First we get the reference, and then we set the old item being dragged to null. We have our 3 different situations, this one, and this one. And then we also set the item to be transparent. Well, we make it to be not transparent because we finally dropped it. We made it transparent when we started dragging it. So this is what we have over here. But if you can see, we have some duplicated code. We have this, and this, and this, and it's the same exact code. So just for best practice, we're going to create a method that will basically be this code. So we're going to name it void cancel dragging or cancel moving. And then we're going to take this thing over here, paste it inside. And of course, we need to pass in this reference. So item reference, game object, item reference, right? Because we don't have this inside of the object. This is a local variable, not a global one. So now instead of this code, we're simply going to call cancel dragging, and we're going to provide it with the reference. We're going to do it over here as well, and over here as well, because it's the same exact code, so we can make it look a bit better. And now we also want to do something that you can also find in a lot of these stackable inventories, and this will be to divide the stackable inventory. So over here, let's go to this part over here. When we move the item to another slot, right? Because over here, we are dragging the item outside of, you can add comments so it will be easier for you to understand. Dragged item outside of inventory. And that will basically drop into the world, right? It will ask this dialog over here. Then we have this one that simply dropped in the same slot. So this is when we take our item, but then we drop it inside the same slot it was, right? We don't move it. But over here is dropped in another slot, and over here other slot did not accept item. Right, so it was either a different item or the limit was exceeded, and that's why we could not merge them. And over here, item was moved to another slot. So these are all the situations. And now we know that if we want to divide our stacks, we need to do it over here, because when we drag our item into another empty slot, this is when we want to divide the stacks. So it should happen over here. And usually it happens by clicking or pressing some kind of key. And in a lot of games, it's the shift key or the control. So we're going to say if input get key code left shift. Again, you can put whatever you want over here, and also make sure to use get key, because this will return true while we hold the shift instead of saying get key down, because this will just return us true once when we started to click. So this is what you should use. And then we're going to basically divide the stack. So divide stack. We're going to generate this method. And of course, we need to also provide a reference and generate this parameter, so we know what is the item that we want to divide, right? So when we dropped an item into another slot and we hold shift while doing it, then it's going to call this method. So I'm going to show you how it looks, but this is what happens. And then inside the divide stack, we're simply going to actually divide it. Okay, so over here, we're simply getting a new copy of this item, and this is just so we don't have to take this entire thing and write it every time over here. So we're simply making it a bit shorter. And then we're simply checking if this item that we want to divide has more than one items, because if it only has one items inside the stack, there is no logic to dividing it, right? So only if it has 2 or 3 or more items inside the stack, only then we want to divide it. So we can say check if item stack has more than one item, and then we're simply going to decrease one item from this amount, because we're simply dividing it, right? So usually in these games, again, it depends on the game. Usually you can maybe create some kind of UI. When you do this, when you drop the item, you're going to add some kind of UI that will ask the player how many items you want to divide, or what is the separation logic, right? You can maybe input a number like 10, or you can have some kind of slider that will divide the items into different numbers, and then you click on OK, and it will basically divide it according to the number that you gave it. But it's a bit an overkill for this tutorial. With this setup, with this code, it will be easily done. You simply you activate some kind of UI at this part over here, right? Optional. Activate UI with division logic. So you can do this as well, but we are going to make it simple. We're simply going to divide and take one item into the other slot. So if you drag the entire stack and you drop it into another slot and you hold shift, it will simply divide one item into this new slot. And some games do actually do it this way. So you can do the UI thing, or you can just do this thing and decide that the stack will be divided and one item will be separated from it. So first we reduce one item from the count, but then we add this item as a new item into a new slot, right? So this item that we reduced will basically be this new item that we add into the inventory. Add new item. Now, if you do want to use this UI thing that we're not going to do, over here you can basically wait for some kind of input. Maybe you can have some kind of callback, and then when the user selects the, let's say it has some kind of slider, and then it moves the slider, and the slider sits on like 3 items, or maybe divided into 4 items, then when he clicks OK, you're going to get this value from the slider value. So when he clicked on OK, it will save the slider value and it will save it over here. And then you're simply going to take the value and you're going to check if this is a good value. And then you're going to reduce it from the amount. And then you're going to add a new item. But you're also going to take this new item and you're basically going to add 4 items into this thing. So it really depends on the way you want to implement this. But it's easily done. It's just a matter of 2 or 3 other lines of code. But we're not going to do it. We're simply going to divide it into one more item. Or let's say separate one item. Now, before we can actually test this, there are a few other things that we want to update. And again, as I told you, it will take time until we actually refactor the entire old inventory system. But if we go to this method over here inside the inventory system, this recalculate list method, this is something that we run a lot. It basically updates the list of items that we have. And for example, our crafting system is using this list to know how many items we have, and other systems use this list. But the way it works right now, it simply goes over all of the slots and it checks if it has more than 0 items. And if it has, it means that there is one item and it takes its name. So all of this is not relevant and we need to change it. So we're simply going to delete all of this and we're going to add another new code into it. Okay, so basically what we do here is we first clear the list like we did before. Then we go over all of our slots. We check if they have this inventory slot script, although all of them will have it, but we're still going to check this. Then we're going to get the item that is inside of the inventory slot. And then if this item is not null, so if there is actually something inside of this slot, we're going to check if the amount is more than 0. Because if it's more than 0, it means that there is something there and we can actually add it into the list. And then we're going to loop over all of these items into all of this inventory item that is inside of this slot. And this can be a stack, so it can have multiple items inside. And according to the amount in inventory, we're going to add this item into the item list. Right, so if it's a stack of stones and it has 10 stones, it's going to run this 10 times and it's going to add 10 stones into this item list. If we have 2 different stacks and one stack has 5 stones and the other stack has 2 stones, it's going to go over the first stack, it's going to add 5 stones over here, and then it's going to move to the second stack and it's going to add 2 more stones from the second stack. And then we're going to have 7 stones in total, although they're not in the same stack. And this is just so we can know how many of this item we have in total in our inventory, in this item list. And as I told you, different systems use this list. For example, the crafting system, so it will know how many materials we have. Now we also want to call this method a bit more because we do want to check this update every time there is actually some kind of dragging or splitting, and we didn't have splitting before, we didn't have merging before, so these are kind of new events that we need to take into consideration. So we're simply going to move to the place that we actually open our inventory over here, open UI, and at the bottom we're going to call this method as well. And we also want to call it inside our crafting system. So we can simply open our crafting system, and inside the crafting system, inside the update method, over here when we open the crafting system, we also want to call this method and simply recalculate the list. Well, this will be refresh needed items. Refresh needed items, and this is a method that is inside of the crafting system, but it also gets a new copy of the item list. So we also want to refresh the items and basically update the UI inside the crafting system. But we want to do this a bit more because we updated the item list as well. As I said, there are more events now. We have merging and dividing. Now, we do still have one problem with this merging and the dividing, because if we're going to try to divide our stones into two separate stacks, then as soon as it's going to be added into the inventory, it's going to be merged again, right? Because over here we say add a new item of this kind into the inventory, but as soon as it's going to do it, it's going to check if there is another stack and it's going to add it into the same stack. So we're basically not checking if it should go into a separate stack or not. So for this, we can simply add another parameter over here. Let's say bool, and this will be should stack. Okay? And this way we can send info into this add to inventory to know if we should stack or not. Because sometimes we don't want to stack. Then we're going to use this bool to basically be a condition to the stacking. So we're going to say if, or we can also do something like that, if this is not null and this is true, then do the stacking. Otherwise, just add it into another slot. But now we also need to add, and if you save right now, you're going to get a lot of errors because all of the different places that we use this method are going to require this parameter. So we're going to simply right click, find all references, and it's going to open all the places that we use, that we call this method. So now we have to add this bool into all of these places, otherwise there will be errors in our project and we won't be able to even run the game. So we go over here, we click on the first one, and this is inside the crafting system. It requires this thing. So this is when we craft a new item. And at this point, we do want to stack, right? There is no reason not to stack. So we're going to set it to be true. We save, then we go to the next one. This is when we actually want to divide. And this is important over here. We want to set it to be false, because we don't want to stack them when we're dividing the stack, right? This is the entire point of dividing the stack. We don't want to stack. So false, because we don't want to stack the item. So this is important over here, but we still need to continue. So this is for the fishing system. When we add the fish, sure, we want to stack, why not? True. When we get a bunch of salmons, we want to stack them together. Then this is inside the interactable object. Sure, why not? Let's stack. True. Then over here, this is the quest system. So you see that there's a lot of places we use this add to inventory. Sure, true, why not? This is when we get the reward, I guess. Then let's continue. Also over here, and the last one is, this is when we save. So this is the saving system. So also over here, let's just save it. And of course we can change this later, and from now on when you use this method you need to decide if you want it to be stackable or not. So now we can finally run the game, and when we pick up a stone, and another stone, it's going to get stacked together. But now when I start dragging this stack and I hold left shift and I drop it into another slot, it will divide it into 2 items. And of course we can merge them back again. We can pick up another stone and then merge these and then merge these, divide them, right? So everything is working, and of course now we're only dealing with stones, but we can also have other items, and we can increase the stack, we can merge them back together, and this is basically the main part of the stacking system. At this point, most of the things should work, but as I told you, we still did not cover everything because we still have some methods that were not upgraded. So for example, if we go to our crafting system, we're going to see 3 stones, right? So it reflects the amount of items. But what if we're going to try to craft this axe? It will try to remove these items from the inventory. So it's going to call this remove item method. But this remove item method is still not upgraded. It's still working on the old system, right? It checks how many, it requires us to provide a name and the amount of items to remove, and then basically removes the amount of items from each slot. So it's not going to remove the items from one specific stack or something like that. So this is the old method. So we can also say need to be upgraded to new stackable inventory. And this is not the only place that we still need to upgrade. So at this point, this is not going to work, and that's why I told you that some things might break. It's not actually breaking, it's just that they're not going to work with the new system. So this is something we're going to deal with in the next episode, and I know that I planned to finish with the stacking inventory in 1 or 2 episodes, but there's a lot of things to do, and I don't want you to just figure this out on your own. I don't want you to get stuck with your project all broken. So I do want to cover all of these things, and that's why we're going to deal with this in the next episode. So that's all. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, please leave a like, leave me a comment, share with your friends, and I'll see you next time.